And US President Trump has extended the Iran ceasefire while maintaining a blockade on Iranian ports. And for more perspective on what the ceasefire actually means, we are joined by Professor Gulshan Sachdeva, School of International Studies, JNU. Professor Sachdeva, welcome to DD India. Appreciate you giving us your precious time. Yesterday, President Trump was warning of renewed bombing and saying there was no plan to extend the ceasefire, but within hours, he announced an extension. Tell us, what does this shift tell us about the US strategy on Iran?
Well, thank you for having me. I think things are still pretty complicated. The good thing is, in a sense, that ceasefire is extended, as you can see. And by and large, ceasefire has been held with Iran and also between Israel and Hezbollah. But this is complicated because there is no time limit. It means they can attack anytime. This is what, in fact, some of the Iranians are saying, that this is a ploy to kind of, have a surprise attack on Iran. But at least now there is the extension of this ceasefire. So I'm sure there's a lot of diplomatic activities going on. There are three immediate issues. One is about ceasefire. At the moment, now that has been extended. Although since there's no deadline, so that kind of uncertainty will always be there. But then the second is Strait of Hormuz. Now that's earlier only Iran was using Strait of Hormuz as a leverage. Now the US they are also using it. So for practically the Strait of Hormuz for the rest of the world is kind of still very closed, very limited movement. And the third is about the real issue. This is what, in fact, the last time they said that the talks were kind of, they couldn't really had an agreement on the nuclear issue. At one point of time, even before the war began, there was indication by Oman and others that they were quite close to certain agreement. So maybe that work has already been done, but in between, there has been obviously an attack on nuclear facilities in Iran. So situation has changed. So I think these are three tricky points at this point of time. And still, I think there is some hope that the talks may happen in Islamabad in the next 1 or 2 days. In fact, they were supposed to happen yesterday. It didn't happen. In fact, there was also reports that already Vice President J.D. Vance was on his way, but actually now we know that that didn't happen. But I think a lot of activity is going on, and in fact, the Field Marshal Asim Munir was also in Iran earlier. So the Pakistan is of course trying, and they have welcomed in that sense that ceasefire has been extended. But things are still, I think, pretty serious and complicated at this point of time.
Professor, also, Iran has reacted skeptically. They vow, in fact, military response if blockade continues, and says the US is not, in fact, serious about diplomacy. Tell us how much trust deficit now exists between both sides.
No, obviously, absolutely, there is no trust.
Yeah.
Because, from the Iranian side, one can understand that, they said that anyway we were negotiating when the attack happened. So now also they are saying that we are prepared, so anytime they can do it. So, but I think still, a lot of damage has been done to Iran. So they also would not like to suffer further damage. But of course, they are preparing for any kind of attack anytime. But I think now, to me, it looks like that this particular phase of conflict is kind of over, looks like, because as I said, these are three basic points. About ceasefire or extension of ceasefire, on the nuclear issue, and of course on the Strait of Hormuz, which both of them are using as a leverage. Now, if they are able to have some kind of understanding on these three, then of course there are also fundamental differences between Iran and the United States. That will take very long to kind of, come to any kind of understanding, because the kind of security role which Iran would like to see for the United States, within this region, because they would not like to see all the bases, etc., near them within this region. So that's a very fundamental difference. And similarly, Americans and the Israelis, they also do not want the kind of role within this region Iran would have, and and even the Gulf countries also would have difficulties in accepting that kind of a major role for Iran in this region. So those are in fact larger issues for which I think maybe months and years will have to talk and discussion, and different kind of security architecture will have to be built for this region. That will continue. But at the moment, actually, for everyone who is really affected, particularly because this particular conflict has not really affected only this region. Of course, it's not just only between Iran and Israel and US. The whole Gulf region itself is affected,
Yeah.
and because of the closure of Strait of Hormuz, and because of Gulf countries, they are major producers of energy and other products, and that's not really, I mean, so production facilities have been hit, and it's not being transported. So the world economy is dependent on the economies which are dependent on outside energy, like India, Europe, and many Asian countries. And overall, in the global economy, scenario is pretty bleak now, because if it continues, and the expectation are very important, because if the price, as you can see, it used to be before war between 60 to 70 barrel. Now it's every day between 90 to 100, and the moment there is some good news, it goes to 85, 90. The moment there is certain negative news, again it goes above 100.
Yeah.
So we are seeing at least for the next couple of months, hovering around between 90 to 100, because even if everything goes smoothly, still the production facilities have been hit within the region. It will take time for things to come to normalcy. So disruption has already been made. But at least now you hope that, at least for the last 10 days or so, the ceasefire has been there.
Yeah.
And even now between Israel and Hezbollah, there is ceasefire. So that's a kind of positive. But, I mean, we were hoping that, talks will happen in Islamabad, and maybe there'll be some limited breakthrough. Even that is under cloud now at the moment.
But Professor Sachdeva, I mean, you have told us about the major sticking points between both the sides that are stalling the solution, in fact, permanent ceasefire. But if talks fail despite this extension, I mean, in most probabilities, I mean, second round of talks will happen in some time or the other. But are we looking at a more intense confrontation than before if talks fail completely?
Well, I mean, any kind of possibility is there, but I think, as I said, to my understanding, at this particular point of time, I think both, but even with I mean, even the US itself, they also would not like to extend, because they also would like to be out, because earlier they thought it would be very small, limited war. It has already taken almost, 2 months now. So, I think at the appetite at the moment looks like is less, but of course they are building up forces all around.
Yeah.
Things can always go wrong, and things can there could always be miscalculation on one side or another. Things can flare up. But I think that's what, in fact, the hope is, that still they are also talking, because earlier they were not even talking.
Yeah.
Even with the certain kind of messages being passed by Pakistan or by other players. So at least the talks are going on, and there is a still there is a possibility that the second round of talks may happen. So the sticking point at this point of time looks like mainly the nuclear issue. And now, from Iranian side, because what they feel is, because, earlier, in fact, they were hoping that, many observers are also hoping that it will be very difficult for the US really to attack, sending ground forces, because then that will become more messy and complicated. But I think in a very intelligently, I would say the US is now again using the Strait of Hormuz like the Iran was using. So they have kind of, now stopped their exports, because at least earlier, Iran was able to continue to export significant amount of their energy resources mainly to China. So at least more than 1 million barrels of oil was still being coming to the international market. Now even that has been stopped. So there is a further stress in that sense in the energy market, and both are trying to use it. So I think the US is pushing Iran through the blockade of Strait of Hormuz, that they should come to negotiation. And I think since there's no trust, they feel that this itself is a violation of the ceasefire.
Yeah.
So there, at the moment, looks like the things are stuck. But one can only hope that since they have extended this ceasefire, hopefully, I think in the next 1, 2, 3, 4 days, coming days, there might be certain possibility, might be some talk. One can only hope for that, but things can always go wrong. And already, but I think that at the moment, I think the US is also trying to, as I said, be out of this. But of
Yeah.
course, there are basic fundamentals, the differences between Iran and US and between Israel and US, those will continue. For that, a new economic and security architecture, which is going to be built
Yes.
in the months and years to come,
Yeah.
that's a long process. I mean, the conflict has been there for decades in this region. It's not something that suddenly you will find that solution to every problem.
Exactly.
At the moment, we are just hoping that the ceasefire
Yeah.
held continues and Strait of Hormuz is open,
And
and
yeah.
hopefully they find certain solutions that nuclear issue. So I
Yes,
think
and
these three
like you
issues and
said,
rest of the
yeah,
yes.
good thing is that they are ready for talks and hope real negotiations are taking place behind the doors. We are running short of time. Professor Sachdeva, thank you for your perspective.
Thank you for having me.